Welcome to China Insider, a podcast from the Hudson Institute's China Center. I am Miles Yu, Senior Fellow and Director of the China Center. Join me each week for our analysis of the major events concerning China, China threat, and their implications to the U.S. and beyond.
It's Tuesday, September 3rd, and we've got three stories to detail with Miles. First, we discuss IBM's announcement that they'll be ending their research and development operations in China, impacting over 1,000 jobs. But they're not cutting these jobs, just relocating them outside of China. Other big tech companies have done the same, and Miles explains what's causing the business exodus. Second, we break down the CCP's new housing pension system being rolled out to 22 cities inside China, and why this planned program is just another example of massive state bureaucracy chipping away at the public's trust. And finally, we add another point to the story of the summer, and that is naval disputes and collisions, which saw its newest entry this weekend with China ramming a Philippine maritime patrol vessel. Miles explains the strategy and mindset driving the CCP's specific targeting of the Philippines. All right, Miles, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Phil.
We start with economic shakeup as IBM is going to close all of their research and development operations in China. It's over 1,000 jobs. So in their statements, they talk about this just being a business decision, but we know there's more there, Miles. So peel back the curtain for us on this.
Well, IBM is pulling out of China is a major event because IBM's primary interest in doing business in China is in research and development. So the R&D apparatus in China has been huge and also very, very instrumental in helping China developing its own R&D apparatus. You know, IBM is famous for making computers. And many years ago, IBM sold its personal computer laptop business to China. That's a Lenovo. So Chinese 100% owns it. This time, IBM is pulling out of China. It's a big deal. But it's also very, very telling. It's not an isolated incident. Let's start with the Chinese national strategy. The IBM's pull out of China fits into the Chinese national strategy. The Chinese government first started out with getting Americans invested in China by a huge number, by creating all kinds of unrealistic investment incentives. And then there was still U.S. companies' operational model and trade secrets by fiat, because if you want to invest in China, you must agree with the Chinese government to share your technology and key data with the Chinese government. Otherwise, no business for you.
Right.
So if you want to invest in China, you join the company with Chinese partner. And that Chinese partner, by law, must have more than 51% of the ownership.
Oh, wow.
So the Chinese government started out by creating a very unfair environment. So, and you will be in disadvantage in the first place.
Right.
But, you know, people keep putting billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into China over the years. Once the Chinese government created competitors for the American companies, the government tried to kick out the U.S. companies. And with the Chinese companies under total Chinese control, would dominate the market. And this is basically is the pattern. And how do they do that? Well, all kinds of methods. Number one, through all kinds of national security laws, in the pretext of protecting China's national security. Particularly in July last year, China amended its counter-espionage law, and that will make China a draconian national security state, and that would have all reasons, or no reasons at all, to kick out any foreign companies, particularly American companies. Since last year, the Chinese national security apparatus has raided many American companies, arrested employees of this working for the U.S. companies, and they kicked out at least 7 U.S. Due diligence companies. Those are companies that provide real economic data and provide a realistic assessment of Chinese economy to American investors. And those companies include Benz and Corporation, Mintz Group, Captivision Partners, and et cetera, et cetera. The reason is that the Chinese government is most afraid of economic reality. all major global credit rating companies, particularly the big threes, the S&P Global Ratings, Moody's, and Fitch Group, have given China negative ratings, and they're all kicked out of China by the Chinese government. This basically created a terrible investment environment in China. That's one reason why most of American companies have fled China, and those who are still remaining in China are still thinking about it. They have a plan B, including Apple, by the way. So because it's impossible for U.S. company to stay in China. As far as IBM per se, there's one specific reason. Because IBM, Dell, all the IT companies, their main business to provide IT infrastructure. And IBM in particular, their business is in maintenance, mainframes and data systems. So the Chinese government right now has given all its orders to non-American companies. And so IBM basically, they don't get any orders at all from the Chinese government, because the Chinese government has total control of many of the major orders in China. So that's why IBM is literally out of business. And the Chinese government would encourage, they actually have a national policy to buy Chinese. That's why IBM literally, had no business to stay. This is one of those things that they do. This would have a global impact. Not just IBM, but also many companies fleeing China would have global impact.
Yeah. They aren't cutting these jobs. They're likely just relocating a lot of these workers to different places, different countries in Asia, some in the US. And Microsoft also made a similar move to relocate 700 to 800 employees based in the other countries that were previously located in China. So a lot of companies are making this pull out of China. What could it mean for the global economy and world politics?
You mentioned about the many companies are doing the same thing, and I'll answer the question about the impact of this exodus. The companies that have get out of China or have been kicked out of China or relocated, whatever it's called. The fact is that they have no presence in China.
Right.
This will include big companies like NVIDIA, Samsung, Google, and this French grocery chain that's been in China for almost 40 years, Carrefour, who just got out of China. And Japanese companies are particularly keen to this. Many of them have already out of China. Japanese company giants like National, Nikon, Suzuki, Toshiba, Canon, Sony. So, and Americans, of course, Yahoo has been out of China for years, and Amazon is get out of China. So this is basically the global exodus out of China. Now, what does it mean? This potentially could mean a lot to global economy and world politics, because global economy is now at risk of being divided into two parts: the CCP dominated part and the free market part. Yet both parts share the same international free trade and open market system. And this is basically a sheer economic reality. Therefore, the key to stopping the CCP march toward global technology and economic dominance is to disqualify China from joining the international free trade and open market system by declaring China as a non-market economy. This is something I've been advocating for quite some time. I hope somebody who is in a position of power would listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay. If somebody who is in power did hear you say this and wanted to act on it, what would they have to do?
We started with the examination of China's qualification of joining, say, WTO, or whether China would be qualified to join the American market, particularly the capital markets and some of the technological aspect of that. So this is the only way you can do it, because the Chinese economy fundamentally is the CCP driven. The decision power that decides the Chinese economic reality is not a market. It's the Chinese Communist Party's political bureau, the Politburo. So this is not a market. That's one of the reasons why China, in my view, is not even qualified to be a member of the international global trading system.
I think that's a good way to close it out, Miles. Moving on to our second topic. China is piloting a, quote, housing pension system in 22 cities, which is causing some great national unease. But my question is, as someone in a market economy, what is a housing pension system, Miles?
Housing pension is a fancy name just rolled out by the Chinese government a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be experimented in 22 major Chinese cities, including major metropolises like Shanghai and Beijing. This is going to affect a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people. Housing pension system, the Chinese government said, is basically a regular payment system by the homeowners to a public fund, which will be used to check the safety of the house. It's like, a person growing older. So all houses also have a process of aging. So that's why you pay the pension to take care of the house.
So people have been paying into a, quote, housing maintenance fund since 1998. So this has been something they've kind of been thinking about or planning for. But why is housing maintenance such a crisis in the first place?
The crisis is happening for many reasons. Number one is really a ownership dilemma. In China, China is a socialist country by which nobody really owns the house. You can buy a house, but the ownership belongs to the state. You only have a right to live on that allegedly for 70 years. So after that, you go back to the government. So people do not really have a sense of ownership. So that means two things. Number one, people do not pay much attention to the maintenance of the house. It's like, you're a renter versus the owner of the house. So you don't take care of your house as nearly as much as if you actually own the thing. Secondly, if you don't own the house, so there's no reason for the government to really collect the property tax. So property tax is a taxation on owners. So government, in theory, should pay for the property tax because it's not owned by people. So that's an ownership problem. So historically, the maintenance cost is not really factored in the properties, and that basically causes a lot of deterioration of the housing infrastructure. Secondly, China's infrastructure building, and particularly housing, has a problem of quality. Corner cutting is a national pastime in China. So you've got a lot of contractors who are pretty much like, unscrupulous. They build houses of poor quality. So many houses were poorly built. And so this is not just about housing. China's entire infrastructure system is a high-speed rails, airports, hydroelectric dams, skyscrapers, etc., etc. They're all entering the same high maintenance period. So China has a huge burden of infrastructure maintenance right now. That's one reason so many crises occur. But China has more skyscrapers than many countries. It has several times more skyscrapers than the United States, for example. But many of the skyscrapers are poorly built, and there's occupancy is very low. So it's not driven by market, as I said earlier, but it's driven by party policy. This is one of the reasons why right now you need a huge amount of money to keep the infrastructure healthy and safe. Now, of course, some people who actually buy the houses, they have to pay some fees at the community level, at the homeowners association type, but that's not nearly enough. So what this housing pension is trying to do is mostly create a public fund to be managed by the local governments and to provide sufficient funds out of pockets of the buyers, and that's why people are so anxious and confused and even upset about more money coming out of the pockets where people have really very little money to in the first place. Now, this money to be collected from home buyers would do basically three things according to government announcements. Number one, to conduct regular home safety inspections. Number two, to buy home insurance. Number three, to basically to make sure that there is some kind of catastrophic things happen to the structure, foundation of the house, and then you have money to pay for it. People's reaction has been very mixed most of them were confused and unhappy, but they also believe this probably is a good way to go forward. The major problem right now is the concern about local corruption. Because if a local government or Chinese government as a whole is going to manage this, and who knows who is going to take the money away from their hard-earned payments. So this is the problem that people were not very clear, because Chinese bureaucracy is so corrupt and so costly. They're very parasitic, number one. They're also most hated by the Chinese people.
So, Miles, is the real issue here and people's reaction really just this is the latest example of trust issues between citizens and how the party might use their money, whether it's local corruption or risky housing built in the first place? Does this seem like a trust issue?
Well, in the real sense, yes. The tension between Chinese government and a huge bureaucracy and the Chinese people, particularly the middle-class people, keep in mind, people who could afford buying a house, they're relatively well off. So
yeah,
that's why there's trust issue. Let me just say, to magnify that point a little bit, China is the world's second largest economy after the United States. But China's bureaucracy is just atrociously huge. In the United States, the federal budget, right? You spend, U.S., for example, spend about 21% on healthcare, 5% on education, and only spend about 6.5% on government administration, the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
In China, the government budget, 70% of them, 70% of them are spent on government administration, on bureaucracy. It's huge, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, that's the source of corruption, because the Chinese government right now, local government, are kind of broke. This is why people were leery about paying more money for the house they bought, which probably they think is a good idea. But then give the money to the corrupt bureaucracy. That's something that they're not really sure about. Now, this also could have a huge impact. I just mentioned the phrase, the middle class. Well, there's no sort of a middle class per se in China, just a middle income class probably. Because these people are normally what we call within this Chinese system. So in other words, many of them are government employees. They're supporting the Chinese government. If their self-interest, particularly their houses, were impacted, and I think it's going to create a major problem for the Chinese regime. So eventually, this housing pension system may be a very bad sign for China's political security. And so government, of course, they were normally curious about this kind of stuff.
Well, when the bureaucracy is that big, it shouldn't shock people that to come up with another new program for an influx of money, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
In a dictatorship, greed and corruption normally is a habit. It's hard to kick.
Well said. Well, for our final topic, I feel like the theme of this summer, since I've been helping you out with the show, has been South China Sea naval encounters. And this weekend, we saw yet another one with a Chinese Coast Guard vessel ramming a Philippine maritime patrol vessel. Both sides blamed each other for the incident, but if you watch the video, it's pretty obvious. There's a clear, caught in 4K scenario of the Chinese ship ramming the Philippine ship. It's pretty obvious. So this has been the Philippines, Taiwan. They've had issues with all kinds of people, but in this instance in particular, why is China picking on the Philippines?
That's a good question. China has the maritime and territorial disputes with pretty much most of its neighbors, right?
Yeah.
You have India, Vietnam, and Malaysia, Brunei, and South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, to name the most obvious.
Just to name a few.
But why Philippines? It's not really about the Philippines. It's about the United States. China has designated the United States as this chief adversary for decades. Why Philippines? Because the Philippines is the only country in the entire Southeast Asia that has a mutual defense treaty with the United States.
This is an extension of the U.S. in their eyes.
Absolutely. Everything China does global strategic-wise is all about the United States. So supporting Russia's war in Ukraine, supporting Hamas, Iran's interference in the Middle East peace, supporting Maduro regime in Latin America, it's all aimed at the United States' global hegemony, as the China terms it, because ultimately only the United States can stop China's global march to dominance. So that's why the Philippines. Now, you notice this, it's not just about the Philippines. It's a timing, because the American National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, just went to China and tell Chinese, just behave, right? Just please be nice to us.
Right.
And of course, they are very cantankerous. This is the gigantic middle finger to Jake Sullivan and the United States. So not only this, China also, at the same time, speeding up its provocation against Japan. You know, China's airplane, for the first time, intruded into Japanese sovereign airspace. And also, just the other day, their warship has entered the Japanese sovereign water. Oh, this is pretty provocative. It's all about giving the United States the middle finger. That's it. Because Japan is the another country that has a very strong security mutual defense agreement with the United States.
Right.
So that's one reason why Japan and Philippines were the primary targets. By the way, incidentally, the maritime police ship that the Chinese Coast Guard vessel rammed into is a ship provided by Japan to the Philippines to enhance maritime law enforcement. So there's a lot of symbolic meaning going on there. So that's why China is a country that is determined to kick the Americans out of the East Asia, out of Southeast Asia. So it could become hegemon. You know what happened? You know, this is very interesting because today, this program goes live to the audience is September 3rd. September 3rd marks the signing of the surrender by the Japanese during World War II. You know, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor for exactly the same reason China is doing right now. That is, Japan wants to become a hegemon of what's called the co-prosperity sphere in East Asia. And they realized soon that the United States would not allow it to happen. That's why the United States became a target of Japan. This is what China has realized in the last 10, 15 years, that in order to be even a regional hegemon, China must destroy the United States. As simple as that.
Is there any significance behind the timing of this one, or is this just more of the same theme that we've been seeing?
This is a national strategy since the time Mao, since the 1940s. So it has never changed.
Yeah.
The tragedy of all this is such a major doctrinal principle held by the Chinese Communist Party has been invisible to a lot of people in Washington, D.C., in the decision-making circle. And it's time to change that. And I think we did change that since the Trump administration. And endorsed by both parties, by the way.
There we go. And hopefully this show just continues to be an extension of that.
Extension of that, and to understand China's strategic intent.
Yeah.
Has been so lacking for decades, and now it's all changed.
Well, let's hope we can continue to change that. Thank you as always, Miles. We appreciate your insight. And we'll see you next week for 3 more.
See you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of China Insider. I'd also like to thank our executive producer, Philip Hegseth, who works tirelessly and professionally behind the scenes for every episode to make sure we deliver the best quality podcast to you, the listeners. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word. For Chinese listeners, please check our monthly review and analysis episode in Chinese. We'll see you next time.